Hi guys, my name is Mr. Lead, and today we're going to be starting our topic of habitats and interactions. We're going to be looking at living places, the places that an organism lives. Now, when we talk about the places that an organism lives, or living places is not a very scientific term. There are better terms that we can use to describe where an organism lives, and there are actually different terms we're supposed to use in different situations. It's really important we understand these different terms here and the different definitions here, because biology is really dependent on definitions. You can't really progress much further in the topic of biology without understanding the words and the terms that you're playing with here. So the first term we're going to learn is habitat. What is a habitat? Well, a habitat is simply just a place where an organism lives. There are different types of habitats. For example, we can class a place as being a tropical rainforest place, where you'll see organisms such as green tree frogs and tree ferns residing. By the way, when we talk about an organism is just any living creature. Animals are not the only organisms that exist. When we're talking about habitats, a habitat can be a place for a plant as well. It could be a place for fungi or other living creatures. Habitats we can have different types of habitats, such as a tropical rainforest, or such as an arid desert, or a farmland even, because that's a habitat for cows and livestock. Shallow seabed. Note, I'm not saying the ocean is a habitat. Well, it is, but the term ocean is just really, really broad. We got to separate the ocean into some simpler places. A riverbed, that's another type of habitat. Grassy plains, snow-capped mountains. I think you get the idea. What you'll notice is for every single habitat, every habitat needs some certain things for an organism to survive in that place. It needs food, water, a shelter or a living space, suitable temperatures. These temperatures might range for different organisms, but still every organism needs a certain amount of heat present. You need other organisms present that species can mate with for reproduction, and you need other requirements such as oxygen and carbon dioxide. When we talk about the different things that a habitat needs to consist of, we can classify these things into two categories, and these are really important terms here. You can classify these requirements of a habitat to be either abiotic factors or biotic factors. Really important terms. A biotic factor are anything that affects the survival of an organism that is a living thing. Living things that affect the survival of an organism. So, for example, food. The presence of food is something that will affect your survival. The presence of mating partners, the competition for food, parasites and predators. They're all living factors that affect the survival of an organism. Abiotic factors are non-living things, such as light, temperature, wind, water, soil, snow, salinity. All right? So these are two very important terms to know. Now, we now understand habitat more or less, and we understand abiotic and biotic factors. We're going to understand some other words here. Distribution. Now, people get distribution and habitat mixed up a lot. Distribution refers to where an organism can be found on a map. So if we're talking about the green tree frog, we describe its distribution in words as to say it is native to northern and eastern regions of Australia and to southern New Guinea. This is not the green tree frog's habitat. This is its distribution. All right? We don't say that this area is the green tree frog's habitat. All right? Because if we picked a random area in this map, we would probably not find a place which an organism such as the green tree frog can live in. The green tree frog doesn't live in any place within this map, but it lives in the general places within this map. So this is its distribution. Now, people also get environment mixed up with the term habitat. What an environment is an environment is just the physical, chemical, and biological conditions that exist in a habitat. Basically, an environment is the description of a habitat. It's all the conditions that surround an organism. So, for example, if we're to say a desert habitat, what type of habitat is it? It's a desert habitat. What's the environment of this habitat? It's hot, brightly lit, windy, swept, and arid. That's the environment. Environment is more like a description of the habitat. All right, it's the list of all the conditions that exist in a given surrounding area. Here's some other examples of environments. For example, for the shallow seabeds we were talking about before, they're cold, dark, marine, and salt water. That's some descriptions we can give for this habitat. That's the environment. All right. So habitat is the type of place. Distribution is where on the map the organism is located. And environment, the description of the habitat. Now, here's a really important term that people really get confused a lot. What is an adaptation? An adaptation doesn't refer to where an organism lives, but it's crucial to understand what adaptations are to understand why organisms will live in certain places. An adaptation is just a characteristic of an organism that helps it to survive and reproduce in its habitat. Basically, just any characteristic of an organism is what an adaptation is. For example, if you ask why is it that an owl has wings, why is it that an owl has talons, why is it that an owl has really big eyes? Well, those are the different adaptations of an owl. Why is it that a beaver has the tail that it has? Why is it that it's got really long, sharp, pointy teeth? Why is it that it's got the really thick fur? Well, those are the beaver's adaptations. Adaptations are the characteristics of an organism that help it to survive. Whatever characteristic, whatever adaptation an animal has, you'll generally find some sort of reason why that animal has that adaptation. For example, an owl will have wings because it helps it get around, it helps it fly. It'll have really sharp talons because that helps it catch its prey, its mice, and it'll have really big eyes because that helps it see in the dark. Beavers, they have thick fur because that keeps it warm in the water, a tail to help it build dams, and really sharp pointy teeth so it can gnaw through sticks. So the term adaptation comes from a background in evolution, but whether or not you believe evolution or not, we can all agree that all animals do have adaptations. They have different characteristics that give it an advantage or give it some sort of that helps it to survive and reproduce in a given habitat. All right. Now, if you were to put certain animals with certain adaptations into certain habitats, they would not be adapted to that habitat to be able to survive there. See how the word adaptation can be used. So, for example, a polar bear is very adapted to Arctic climates. But if you put a polar bear into say a desert, then it'll really struggle to survive there because it's not adapted to that environment. Now, remember, when we're talking about organisms, we can talk about plants as well. Different plants also have different types of adaptations. In Australia, we have a lot of plants that are really adapted to fires. Whenever a fire comes through, it ends up burning off a lot of plants. But some of those plants are adapted to be able to grow back after a fire comes through. And some seed pods are designed to only crack open when it senses that a fire is nearby. Some plants are adapted for certain situations. All right, now here's another word that we got to learn, the biosphere. We've talked about habitats, we've talked about distribution, and we've talked about environment. Biosphere just relates to the sum of all the places on Earth where life exists. It's a very big, broad word, a very big, encompassing word. But basically, the ocean, all the places on, all the land on Earth, the atmosphere, Even underground in the lithosphere, we see some organisms living there. That's the biosphere. The biosphere consists of all of this. We use the term biosphere a lot when we're relating to how animals the entire population of animals on Earth can influence other spheres, such as the atmosphere. Yeah, it's a very all-encompassing term. Now, the last term that we're going to look at is ecosystems. Ecosystems is a very complicated term, but in a sense it isn't really, because there's some that you just need to understand some other smaller terms before you understand what ecosystems are. Before you understand what an ecosystem is, you need to know what an individual is, a population is, and a community is. An individual represents just one animal in a given area. Whoops, hang on. All right, so one single animal, one single fish, or one single bug, that's an individual. All right. Now, a population refers to all the individuals of one species in a habitat. All right. So all the different fish all together, grouped all together in one spot, that's a population. All right. A community refers to all the different populations of all the different organisms, both plants and animals, all grouped in the same area. All right. So all the different fish and all the different crabs and all the different jellyfish and seaweed, all the different organism populations grouped into the same area, that's a community. Now, what haven't we described about the habitat yet? Well, we haven't described the abiotic factors in a habitat, and that is what an ecosystem is. An ecosystem includes the abiotic factors in a habitat. So, to recap, a population is all the organisms of a particular species living in the same place at a given time. A community is all the populations of various organisms living in the same place at a given time. And finally, an ecosystem is all the biotic factors, so the whole community, and the abiotic factors, so the environment around them, and the interactions between these two factors. So this is really key. An ecosystem, if you're defining an ecosystem, you need to include these 3 points in your definition. An ecosystem consists of the biotic factors, abiotic factors, and interactions between them in a given area. So if we were to word that a little bit more concisely, an ecosystem consists of a community of organisms, that's the biotic factors, the environment the organisms live in, the abiotic factors, and any interactions between them. All right, you need to have those 3 points to describe what an ecosystem is. So when we look at, say, a marine ecosystem, when we're looking at not just the specific places that the organisms live in, because remember, a habitat focuses on the place and just the place where an organism lives. An ecosystem describes the interactions between all the different organisms. It'll describe, an ecosystem is describing how fish might eat the cockles and the seaweed, and the squid might compete with the fish for certain food, and some other fish might eat a zooplankton, which will eat phytoplankton, and all of these biotic communities will also be affected by the salinity of the water, so how salty the water is. And they'll also be affected by how much sunlight comes down. And they'll be affected by all sorts of other factors. So an ecosystem is referring to the community and the environment and the interactions between them. It's a much broader, much encompassing term, whereas a habitat is just simply just the place that we're saying an organism lives in, and the type of place. Environment is the description of that place and the description of the surroundings, and a distribution is where on a map that organism lives. Okay, thanks for watching, guys.